Case, we are live.
Oh, all right. Yes. Good day, everyone, and welcome to this live webinar. The webinar is about lifestyle is the way to achieving SDG free in developing countries. Our sustainable development goals are the global benchmarks for progress. Often the third one is put aside due to its complexity. However, COVID-19 pandemic has proven that health and well-being is paramount to our existence as human beings. Vigilant Living wants to raise awareness about it by employing a paradigm shift view on how lifestyle or behavior modifications is the way to achieving SDG 3. Uh, Details about this webinar. In this webinar, we are going to introduce all the 9 targets and the 4 means of implementation of SDG 3. We're going to discuss in details about all the challenges and opportunities of each target and mean, and later, after the discussion and the presentation, we are going to have a PDF document on all the contents of discussion after the webinar. And my name is Sande Elson Oundo. I'm the host for today and the moderator. And with me, I have Jacob Hachin. Uh, Jacob is a medical doctor and is the CEO of Vigilant Living, and he's our presenter for today. Welcome, Mr. Yakub, to the session.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Sande, for a warm introduction. Uh, Welcome all our viewers, whether today's live stream or the video, which will be on our YouTube channel.
Yes.
I think we can commence this webinar. As you can see, we're going to talk about, actually, as Mr. Sande mentioned, we're going to introduce SDG 3, Sustainable Developmental Goal number 3. We're going to look in details the 9 targets and the 4 means of implementation. We will end up with vigilant living. Who is vigilant living? What is vigilant living as a philosophy, as a way of life, and as a company? And hopefully we can have a few questions and answers at the end of our session.
Yes.
Okay. Introduction. So, Sustainable Developmental Goal number 3 states it's there to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. It has 13 targets, which 9 of it are outcome targets, and the remaining 4 are implementation targets. And all those targets have a total of 28 indicators to measure the progress towards that goal. Now, how does WHO define health? Because the word health is both abstract and it can have multiple meanings depending on the situation. The definition they have stated is health is a state of a complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of a disease or infirmity. So they have really put it out there that healthcare is holistic. Health is not just about whether you are sick, whether you are not sick. It's more than that. It encompasses our well-being, which makes it the backbone of our sustainable existence and development, specifically in these developing countries. So the third sustainable developmental goal, the good health and well-being, has, as I mentioned, 13 targets, 9 of them which are outcome targets, and the remaining 4 are means of implementation. So we're going to look at them one by one, starting from the target 3.1 and target 3.2. Okay, let's continue. WHO sat down and after, you might say, because these SDGs were, let me say, that they were passed in 2015, 4 years later, 2019, WHO also released what they called Global Action Plan on Physical Activity, which includes, number 1, to create active societies, which is implement social marketing campaigns, promote co-benefits, provide mass participation and build workforce capacity, create active environments, create active people, and lastly, create active systems. And the goal of the Global Action Plan is to reduce physical inactivity 10% by 2025 and 15% by 2030. Because WHO came to appreciate how the aspects to do with non-communicable diseases have taken the biggest burden on healthcare. So from last century to this century, the number one causes of death, including developing countries, have switched from infectious diseases like HIV/AIDS, like TB, to non-communicable diseases or chronic conditions, including diabetes, cancer, heart issues, and even mental health. However, the goal itself was hindered in in a serious manner by the recent COVID-19 pandemic, which has threatened all the progress which has been implemented in the last, let me say, 5 years before the COVID-19 started, which led to more infections increasing, led to more deaths, it has disrupted the flow of healthcare, whether transportation, whether delivery of drugs, the workforce itself. It has halted the progression of universal health coverage, reduced global life expectancy, reduced the immunization coverage, increased the rate of mental illnesses like anxiety and depression, since most of people were quarantined, and even the concepts of financial situation. Some people were lost means of income. Uh, some people's relatives were sick, the family members, that all combined to reduce the mental health. It increased the death from TB and malaria. It at the same time increased the people abusing, let me say, something like tobacco, something like alcohol, because they were all, let me say, they had more time in their hands at home, even domestic violence. So COVID-19, more than anything, has shown how, as I mentioned, that healthcare should be the number one priority, because almost all these other 17, the 16 remaining developmental goals compound and contribute to each other, but without health, there is really any developmental goal. Let's look at this concept of the iron triangle of healthcare. It states that healthcare in general is composed of three angles, three factors. Number one is the access to healthcare. Number two is the quality of the healthcare. And lastly, the cost. And unfortunately, to balance all the three has been the biggest challenge. Uh, you might say, as long as healthcare implementation was put in place, this scientific discovery of something like paracetamols to X-rays and all these things, still, healthcare either, as you can see, there's maybe a high level of access, which means the cost comes down. For example, in a lot of the public healthcare service providers, like health centers, but unfortunately the quality is low. If the quality is high, normally the cost is high at the same time, which reduces the access. So all those three work hand to hand, and we shall try and find a way to optimize all of them so that anyone can access universal health coverage. When it comes to the healthcare service delivery as an expense, as you can see, countries like United States have spent around $10,000 on one person per capita. Maybe you might say even a country like the lowest on the list, which is UK, still spends $4,000. That's a lot of money. You can imagine how much of the GDP spent on healthcare. On one side, that's a good indication that healthcare is getting more attention, but at the same time, that shows you how healthcare is a big burden on the household income within the developing world, because we have talked about this is the developed world, but you can imagine how the developing world is dealing with these issues times 10, specifically during the COVID times. Healthcare expenses can take more than 10% of household income in Uganda and in Africa at large, mainly due to the out-of-pocket payment of expenses. You can see there was a research which showed the average Ugandan makes less than $300 per month, and 10% of that, you can say, is $30. If an average $30 is going to healthcare expenses, that predisposes families to poverty and even generational poverty, which leads to medical bankruptcy and deaths. It's one of the leading causes of generational poverty in Africa and in the world. Now, to offset out-of-pocket payment, the developed world has implemented insurance, but unfortunately, insurance penetration in Uganda is less than 1%, according to Insurance Regulatory Authority Uganda as of January this year. So insurance has not really kicked in Uganda and in the majority of Africa due to certain factors. I don't know whether this document is visible, but you can see how even developed countries like South Africa are still low when it comes to the penetration of insurance, because we shall talk more further about why insurance is not accessible to the majority of people when we are looking at target number 8, which is universal health coverage. Now, healthcare, as I have mentioned, shifted from treating acute or infectious diseases to more chronic diseases. And due to that, chronic diseases have become the biggest burden on expenses, because someone who has an acute infection will likely to go to the clinic, see a doctor, they run a test, they're given medications, let's say if it's malaria, and probably they recover from it. But a chronic condition, which is recurrent, which is present every month, shows you how much of a burden it's going to be on any family, especially the older a person gets. So maybe it will be a person's, let me say, parents who would be either disabled with a chronic condition, or it might not be yet led to disability, but they have to go and get this treatment in every month. For example, if it's hypertension, if it's diabetes. And the biggest contributor to that is obesity. This is now shows how in US, obesity has moved from half of the population in 1994. Now it's almost tripled in children, where 2/3 of kids are obese. That's US. Unfortunately, there's really good research here in Africa and let me say in Uganda. However, from developed cities like the capital city, you can really see how obesity, it's a silent epidemic. On the positive side, internet usage is something which has infiltrated people. In Uganda, 13.9 million, which is 29% of people have access to internet, and the year-to-year increase is 15.1%. And people share social media through using mobile phones. So on the positive side, technologies like internet show a different pathway for solving healthcare solutions. Unfortunately, it has not been taken advantage of. So we shall deep further on why something like internet and technology would be the way a lifestyle change can be implemented in a mass scale in an affordable way, the iron triangle, as vigilant living, how we have contributed to that. So those two phrases summarizes this whole webinar. We're talking about promoting health, which henceforth prevents the disease. So promoting health and preventing a disease is the ultimate solution to reaching the Sustainable Developmental Goal number 3. There are a couple of locations called the blue zones in the world because of the miraculous, you might say, survival rate of the people who live in those places who can reach the ages of 100. But not just that they will live long, but they are active without less disabilities. So three of those places are Loma Linda, which is in US, Okinawa, which is in Japan, and Sardinia, which is in Italy. So this is a Venn diagram which shows some of the shared features in all these three places. But let's look at the center, which is what they all share: the concept of family, having a positive relationship, no smoking, a plant heavy diet. You can see how much of a meat, specifically processed meat, has contributed to the obesity and the metabolic diseases, which is becoming frequent. Constant moderate activity, physical activity. You may say these places all share an aspect of being a ruler. So people are living some sort of a rural lifestyle where they are digging farms. So they're always working, unlike living in a city where a person is always either driving or they are sitting at an office. Most of their work involves knowledge work. The aspect of social engagement. You see, there's a loneliness epidemic in the developing world, in the big cities, and maybe the concept of legumes, which you may say touch upon the aspect of fiber diet. Lastly, yes, vigilant living. We have this philosophy. I will discuss it further at the end of this webinar, but I would like you to just have a picture of what we mean to have a vigilant life, which is not really so much different from those factors I mentioned in the blue zones. So yes, that will be the first section of this presentation. Yes, I can't hear you. I think your sound. Yes, you have muted yourself. Can you unmute?
All right. Yes, you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Right. I was saying the first presentation has been nice, has been good, and personally, I drew two conclusions from here. One, I would wish to interest the government of Uganda and perhaps the partners in health, those who are working in health, to interest themselves in the blue zones. How about we come to know about the blue zones in Uganda? Um, Perhaps in line with lifestyle behavior and even achieving SDG free, because I'm sure there are some places in either Kampala or in regions whereby we are sharing some of these typical characters or the characteristics of maybe a healthy lifestyle or a healthy behavior, and perhaps could help us in tracking the achievement of the SDG 3 in different perhaps regions or even in the city. And also the other thing is now is about the iron triangle. Yes, the quality, the cost, and the access. These are really the typical challenges about healthcare and SDG 3. So if everyone can really look at those three and perhaps in one way work towards them, at least would be better in moving forward in promoting health and also preventing diseases, because at least you'll be guaranteed to quality healthcare service, and of course maybe at a cheaper or if perhaps a very low subsidized cost, and also maybe access. That means healthcare must be spread out all over from at least in your nearest reach. But having said that, well, I think we can now move on to the next presentation. Maybe if you want to clarify on any other aspect.
Yes, no, it's okay. Let's proceed.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to tackle the first two targets, which you
Mm,
might say they are the two alongside the third target, which has really we have achieved more progress, especially in the developing world, maternal
mm,
mortality, which is basically the death of pregnant mothers due to complications related to pregnancy, underlying conditions worsened by pregnancy, or the management of these conditions. So it has two indicators to do with maternal mortality ratio and the percentage of births attended by a trained personnel, supervision, care, and advice given to during pregnancy, labor, and postpartum period to conduct deliveries on their own and to care for newborns. The second one, which is to do with child mortality, under the 5-year-old mortality rate, at the same time, neonatal mortality rate. So the difference of maternal mortality rate in Uganda and sub-Saharan Africa has been estimated to reach 336 deaths per 1,000 live births, according to WHO in 2018, while infant mortality rate currently stands at 43 deaths per 1,000 live births, and therefore 1 in 23 children dies before reaching their first birthday, while 42% of the mortality occurs during the natal period. That's according to the Ministry of Health.
mm, mm,
What are the causes of maternal mortality? This is research done by Mbarara Regional Referral Hospital in 2016. They came to discover puerperal sepsis, which is the infection of mothers after pregnancy. It's the leading cause. Hemorrhage, which is also bleeding after pregnancy or during the pregnancy, is number two. Abortion complications or maybe unsafe abortions, which are maybe done from home or facilities which are not up to don't have the capacity to carry out. The fourth thing, which is hypertension in pregnancy, otherwise known as preeclampsia and eclampsia.
mm,
Those are direct causes. We have some indirect causes like severe malaria, which thankfully there is a system in place to prevent such deaths in antenatal care. Anemia, also it's part of antenatal care, and then some other causes. I will touch upon more on coming back to hypertensive diseases in pregnancy and to some extent abortion, which you can say they constitute some aspects of lifestyle, some aspect of behavioral, even anemia for that matter, the infection part to some extent, hemorrhage, all of them sort of have an element which is to do with lifestyle.
mm,
Let's look in a summary about under 5-year-old mortality caused in Africa 2015. The number one cause is still the majority of them are infections, including diarrhea, including malaria, acute respiratory infection, prematurity, congenital anomalies. You can have neonatal sepsis, intrapartum related complication, and injuries. So, to some extent, you can say there has been increased achievements in reducing childhood mortality. That because the goal was to bring it down when you measure by 1,000. So unfortunately, COVID-19 might have spiked some, let me say, increase of mortality, but still there is high progress in those two, maternal mortality and child mortality, due to the efforts put by the government and non-governmental organizations, including WHO, including NGOs to do with maternal health and child health. So they have been a success. We shall talk about some of the concepts to do with lifestyle, which can help to reduce maternal mortality rate. Of course, screenings in antenatal care for any conditions, maybe any underlying infections, any
mm,
underlying metabolic conditions like we talked about hypertension, diabetes in pregnancy, nutritional care, specifically vitamin K, which is found in green leaves like spinach, like cabbage, because you remember vitamin K is important for coagulation of the blood and it reduces the occurrence of bleeding after pregnancy.
mm,
Physical fitness, though cautiously, reducing stress, which stress itself is can even lead to miscarriage,
mm,
abstaining from alcohol, smoking, and other recreational drugs, which both harm the pregnancy, but even the fetus. And lastly, having support from family, from spouse, from friends to contribute to more confidence in the pregnancy period. When it comes to the preterm care, which is now this was before, that one was before delivery. In delivery time, of course, a mother should have had a proper antenatal care. Unfortunately, a lot of mothers sometimes appear in the hospital while they have not really been having a consistent care, and the staff faces complications now of trying to catch up. Hygiene in delivery, which you can say thankfully due to the advancements within maternal labor suits, yes, majority of them. So delivery from hospitals, ideally, compared to delivering from home or a place which are less hygienic. Psychological support from the nurses, from the midwives, from the doctors, some aspect of encouragement. And lastly, education about the consequences of cesarean section anesthesia. That's an interesting point because of the the kind of information out there about how cesarean section is good for, it's less painful, it's faster, has led to a lot of mothers who have the means to go and seek it without having proper education about the consequences of cesarean section, which
mm.
can go from a mild ones, including that ideally by the time a mother has cesarean section, she should not be getting uh, delivering from the normal, let me say, the SVD, the spontaneous vaginal delivery, is prohibited. So it will be continuous to a serious consequences of bleeding, because bleeding increases with cesarean compared to the normal delivery. Anesthesia, which has its own risks. So proper education of these procedures for the mothers before they make the decision. And when it comes to postpartum, of course, psychological support, considering a lot of mothers go through postpartum depression or even postpartum psychosis. Hygiene, again, very important. Nutritional care, and lastly, ambulation and sort of a walking, so that to avoid clottings and, yes, even to start fixing the metabolic system of the body. Okay, yes, I think we are done with this one.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Yako, for that conversation about maternal mortality and the child mortality. I think for me, what stands out very key and strong in this aspect is the aspect of lifestyle. If we now look even at the postpartum care itself, issues about hygiene, issues about hygiene, issues about nutrition, issues about exercise, issues about antenatal care. They are more of lifestyle, they are more of behavior, they are more of things which a mother can do, can embrace, do them on a daily, and actually by doing them, they can become a part of the person, and in line and the long run, actually not both in the short run, in the long run, they can really do much great benefit, and thus leading to less of the mortalities, and of course they'll be really contributing directly to the attainment of the SDG 3. So I believe this is a good point when it comes to lifestyle and even reducing maternal mortality. Lifestyle and behavior is key, because even when we go to hypertensive disorders in pregnancy, or the likes of eclampsia and preeclampsia, basically lifestyle and behavior can really be a very good tool to approaching them from the point of detection, other than getting to know, other than the diagnostic point, where the mother is just diagnosed with a high blood pressure and maybe is due for a delivery, and then you want to do magic or wonders in these few minutes left to the delivery. How about we change the narrative? Let mothers embrace some of these activities, the lifestyle itself, and perhaps in the long run, we'll have a very safe delivery and uh, the contribution to the attainment of sustainable development goals here in Uganda will be remarkable. Thank you.
Okay. So I think we
I
shall
think now
proceed to the next.
we can proceed
Mm.
to communicable diseases.
Yes. As you can see, there are mainly five indicators.
Mm.
The big one, which is HIV, there's tuberculosis, there's malaria, there's hepatitis B, and then there's aspect of tropical diseases. All these constitute communicable diseases. I might comment that this target, like the one before it, has received a lot of improvement because of this. There's been a real global fight against these communicable diseases. And the biggest one, which is HIV rates, have really come down in the last 5 years. As you can see in Uganda, it's literally now the rates are as low as in some areas, 3%, 2%, 1%. There are some areas which still have 4% and above, but the rates of NHIV have both come down at the same time. The way of treating HIV complications before they proceed to AIDS have contributed to people living longer with the condition. The same thing with TB, due to hygiene, due to early screening, due to the treatments available, the triple or the quadruple therapy, that's also brought down TB prevalence in Uganda since 2016. As you can see, the rates are really low. Malaria, still the one which is very persistent in sub-Saharan Africa due to how hard is it to prevent it. I think currently I was hearing there were some malaria vaccines available. Don't know how much that will contribute, but malaria to some extent also has an aspect of prevention due to lifestyle modification, due to using mosquito nets, perhaps applying some creams, some malaria repellent creams, avoiding staying much time in the around water bodies. Some of these activities can prevent the rate of occurrence, but itself doesn't really lead to much complications unless it is compounded with other factors to do with lifestyle. We shall look more about it. For example, obesity itself can lead to predispose you, or if you already had a condition like kidney issues. So this last one, which is also to do with hepatitis B, it's thanks to the vaccine, it has also come down. As you can see in Uganda, perhaps the northern region, which is a bit higher compared to the rest, specifically in contained places like prisons, due to factors with hygiene, to added quick transmission, but itself with proper lifestyle, because the routes of transmission are more to do with, it can either be blood transfusion, it can be due to the aspect of sexual transmission. So it has an aspect to do with lifestyle to prevent a person from contacting hepatitis B, which itself is not exactly so deadly unless it's, it has comorbidity with another condition, for example, like HIV. And lastly, the aspect of tropical diseases, as you can see, Uganda is sort of is a hotbed for some of the scary ones. You normally hear of Ebola, especially this region of the Kasese district, bordering Democratic Republic of Congo. But there are also some other ones like yellow fever to typhoid here and there. You can hear of some psoriasis, you can have of some measles, maybe the aspect of cholera outbreaks. So most of these tropical diseases themselves have also come down due to antibiotics. However, we might touch upon it later, but the powerful drugs of antibiotics, which are sort of the miracle of modern medicine, is losing its value due to antibiotic resistance or antimicrobial resistance, perhaps because of the abuse from healthcare providers or from clients self-medicating, making some of these conditions, uh, you might say that some of these conditions are going to come back, or there will be no treatment for them just because of the lack of medicines for them. Because all the other medicines which have been given, like for malaria in a sense, or for that matter for TB, where you have even multi-drug resistant tuberculosis, you have to go for, let me say, not even the second option, but like a third option of treatment just because of resistance. Simply for this aspect of infections, more to do with health education about routes of transmission, what to avoid, having regular screenings, especially if a person is predisposed or exposed to it, early diagnosis and treatment, and lastly, drug adherence. Because the lack of drug adherence contributes to the concept of antimicrobial resistance. Yes. Then lastly, the aspect of psychosocial support to do with mental health, because a lot of people who have, for example, like HIV, face a lot of stigma, so contributing to poor mental health, aspect of communal support, aspect of occupational access, skills, training, and lastly, having a healthy recreational activities. Consider most of these conditions are got out of recreational or activities which happen, maybe let me say, for when a person wants to relax. So building a better recreational activities which does not involve a risky behavior. Okay.
All right. Thank you for that presentation about communicable diseases, and purely that has been elaborate about COVID-19, Ebola, issues related with malaria, and even TB. And you talked about a key concept, that is health education, which I believe it's very key when it comes to health education, when it comes to lifestyle changes, when it comes to attitude change or even perception. Because without this education, you definitely cannot change someone's attitude. Of recent, using an example of COVID-19, when it came to the vaccines, all people were hesitant, and now and through health education, there is some good response which was brought on board, and now we believe health education is very key and very core when it comes to lifestyle and even behavior modifications, because the more you educate someone, the more he or she gets more enlightened about some of the things. And also the aspect of these infections, they are more of subjective. They are more of individual centered. Because, for example, let's talk about HIV. If I make my own stand and be like, no, I'm I'm doing away with anything related with HIV, I'm sure 99% you have chances of surviving the illness. But it comes to all individual ownership. So, and this individual ownership must be informed by the knowledge which is good from the education, from maybe even peer educators, health educators. So I think the government or even other health partners need to really look much about education when it comes to communicable diseases. Well, thank you, and perhaps we can proceed to the next target.
Yes. So as I've mentioned, the other three targets to do with maternal mortality and child mortality and communicable diseases have really received a lot of
Attention.
impact, a lot of attention.
Mhm.
However, now this specific one and perhaps the other two which we feel we need have received least attention because of their complexity. So reduce mortality from non-communicable diseases, which has a simple indicator that contributing including cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, and chronic respiratory disease. You can see the biggest shared condition with all these non-communicable diseases is obesity. Because obesity leads to an aspect of insulin resistance, predisposing a person to get type 2 diabetes, which itself contributes to everything of clogging of the blood vessels, predisposing to heart attacks and strokes, to cancers, to even dementia or neurodegeneration. So obesity is the backbone of that. As you can see, this was a research done about obesity in Uganda, though it was to do with people who have HIV attending tertiary care. And unfortunately, you can see how almost people who are obese are overtaking people who are normal weight, or they're almost in the same level, specifically in male. So these are one of the few research which are done on obesity in Uganda. If you can recall, COVID-19 had more serious consequences of people who had this common morbidity of obesity. And the more obese a person was, the more likely they were admitted to hospitals and to become either disabled or to unfortunately pass away from COVID or severe COVID infection. Because even obesity reduces an aspect of immunity, so it leads to immunosuppression. These are called the four horsemen of death. If you remember the horsemen of the apocalypse, number one, which is the base of it, is the metabolic diseases. Everything from type 2 diabetes to hyperinsulinemia to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or non-alcoholic steatohepatitis are when fat infiltrates there. What happens when fat infiltrates the liver, which is now overtaking alcoholic liver disease. So people who are getting liver diseases basically from fat, not from alcohol anymore. Now this one predisposes to these other three, starting from atherosclerosis, which is a clogging of the blood vessels because of some aspect of cholesterol, predisposing to heart attack and stroke, cancer, and neurodegenerative disease, i.e. Alzheimer's. But Alzheimer's is a different kind of dementia. However, the one which is common is vascular dementia, because at the same time the arteries are getting clogged. So a person might not even get stroke, but they may be having a slowly, gradually increasing dementia, forgetfulness. Diabetes, currently, this research was done in 2016, shows 80% of Ugandans who are suffering from diabetes are not even aware. And the ones who are aware have 500,000. So you can imagine if 80% are not aware, this rate can even be up to 5 to 10% of Ugandans can be having one form of diabetes, a different stage of diabetes. Atherosclerosis, the clogging of the blood vessels, this was done in South Africa last year, shows you how the preference of atherosclerosis, especially on African males and African females, in the age brackets of from 30 to 39 and let me say 40 to 49. So it's even becoming conditions which are happening to people on a younger age. So a person who's in their 30s are already having heart issues or even predisposed to stroke, unfortunately. Let's talk about cancers. This was top 10 cancers in Uganda, which is, so actually this is worldwide. As you can see, still cervical cancer, sort of a leading, but you have breast cancer, you have prostate cancer. This is the cancer of HIV, esophagus, cancers like colorectal cancer, which is the hidden one, because it doesn't really present with good symptoms, and the person discovers lately. These cancers also share an aspect of a metabolic abnormality within the body, and even how they increase, like how they metastasize, which means how they infiltrate the other parts of the body. Because our bodies are normally having mutations. So we always having cancer cells, but we keep on clearing it out. But if you already have a condition like diabetes, or you have high levels of insulin, that contributes to the cancer cells to grow faster. So a metabolic conditions is what's predisposing people to have more cancers. And that's the dementia, which has also spiked. You might say it's also because of age, people are living longer. This was age-specific dementia in 2021. As you can see from the ages of 60, 65, the rates increased to go up to 25% by the time a person reached the age of 100. So itself, which leads to a lot of death in older people, so much that people even think it's normal. People assume age means dementia, that by the time someone is old, they have to have dementia. But itself is a condition as a consequence of metabolism. Lastly, this one of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease has really been dealt with because of global campaign against smoking, against tobacco, and you can see how the rates have went down. You might say there's always some spikes here and there because of something like COVID. People had more time. Some of the youth are having like delinquency in the youth contributes to itself. But thankfully, this is the one which has really went down. Simple solutions to reduce such conditions. Number one, let's talk about physical activity, exercise, which reduces sleep, which reduces even mental health, which we shall talk much about later, the blood pressure, brain health. In fact, exercise is the only known treatment and prevention for dementia, heart health, including cancer, even the bone strength, because a lot of people have fractures due to osteoporosis or weak bones. Number two is when it comes to nutrition, basically fasting. It's not necessary that you have to choose one diet from another, but giving yourself a time to digest and to utilize the food you have taken contributes to you having a healthy weight loss, healthy digestion, no problems, increases insulin sensitivity, so avoids you from getting type 2 diabetes, reduces even your aging, boosts your immunity, even growing inflammation. This is why a lot of people who are obese, in a sense, complain from autoimmune conditions which happen, for example, to joints, or even asthma itself is an autoimmune condition. So it's because of the body obesity, and for that matter, insulin predisposes the body to be highly inflamed and even focus. So fasting simply contributes to a longer life. Lastly, sleep, which is also important because it regulates our internal body clock, supports our growth, our emotional processing, it aids our memory building and learning, and is crucial for waste disposal from the brain. At the same time, it maintains hormone balance, metabolism, and immunity. So, proper sleep prevents you from conditions even like dementia and having a stroke, because the normal biological clock happens when a person ideally is supposed to be sleeping around midnight. Is one hormone called cortisol, which is responsible for stress, spikes up in the bloodstream. So not having a proper sleep can even predispose you to have stroke and a poor sleep. So something like alcohol itself contributes to a poor sleep. We shall touch about it a bit further later.
Thank you, Yako, for the presentation about non-communicable illnesses. But what is unfortunate on my side is that when you said 80% of Ugandans are living unaware that they have diabetes. Perhaps we need to go back there and we explore some of the reasons as to why. And I think personally, I would say, well, we know having much like high blood glucose is very disastrous to someone's life. And then we are seeing that 80% of Ugandans are suffering from diabetes, yet they are unaware. And perhaps there could be some reasons as to why this is happening. Perhaps because of the cost, is it because of the access, or is it because of the quality? And then I think it calls for more of the advocacy in line towards funding, because if if you have diabetes, it can predispose you to a variety of other illnesses. For example, there are quite many, and all this, yes, diabetes itself might not really kill you, but you can die because of the underlying conditions that can be associated with having a high glucose in your blood. But how about we make glucose monitoring or measuring a must test in most of these facilities in Uganda, and maybe for a typical adult? What do you think?
Yes, okay, that's a good idea. I agree with you. However, maybe unlike infections, having a condition like diabetes does not necessarily mean
Mm,
a person might need to get on treatment,
mm,
because a simple exercise, simple fasting can
mm,
even bring back the blood glucose. So
mm,
yes, I agree with you to some extent for a person to go and check themselves, but either way, a person has to live a healthy lifestyle,
mm,
whether they have diabetes or not.
mm.
Yes.
Yes, yes, that's very true. And also, I also don't. What about this aspect of? Of course, there are quite many people who do exercise only on condition that I went to my doctor and my doctor said I have a high blood glucose in my blood, or I have a high blood pressure, so I need to exercise. And that's also a very bad narrative amongst the population, that you must only do this when something has been figured out in you. How about we open up this narrative that please, you need to live this healthy life from point A to point Z. It's not only when you have reached point Y that you're left with a few other things only to do, and therefore you will tend to do some of these activities on pressure, on demand, and perhaps you'll not even do them rightly because of other associated stressful challenges. But I think it is a good approach to take lifestyle and behavior holistically from point A of your life to point Z of your life. That means from your early ages of life to maybe the later ages of life, because it really beats some my understanding to see someone trying to jog around every day, every evening, just because he of yesterday was diagnosed with maybe pre-diabetes. How about you do these things even when you're very healthy, when you're very free, when your glucose is still even very in the normal ranges? But well, having said all that, we can move on to our next conversation, Yako.
Eh, another aspect of, you might say, non-communicable diseases, which is actually the part two, I might call it, of target 3.4, which is promoting mental health, hence reducing suicide rate. The rates of suicides have spiked, unfortunately, this is in Uganda since 2022. As you can see, there's a high rate of attempted suicide from the youth, especially the young age. Even completed suicides have spiked. All suicide incidents, 82, completed by, especially when it comes to refugees, people who are sort of disadvantaged in the community, have high rates of suicide especially in the youth. So what is contributing to this rate of suicide? One factor you can say it's the view of the brain as a cog. So treating mental illnesses as other illnesses, where you give a person, let me say, a medication, when they actually need not just a medication but more of psychological support. You have some types of mental illnesses where you have anxiety disorders, you have mood disorders like depression, the bipolar, some psychotic disorders like schizophrenia, eating disorders, impulse disorders, and even personality disorders, and at the same time, post-traumatic stress. So mental illness, it's a big topic with different subsets. This was 2017 WHO statistics in Uganda, which shows Uganda ranked among top 6 African countries with 14 million mental disorder cases, which even showed the rate of depression is 4.6% of the population, and anxiety is up to almost 3%. 35 out of 100 Ugandans might be battling mental health disorders. So consider that's 35% of the population can be having a mental health disorder one way or another. With something like COVID, have increased the rate of occurrence. It occurs more in women, and even the cost of care is quite expensive. That's even if it's available, which might not be available to begin with. This was the research done in prisons 2017, which shows, as you can see, the commonest one, you can even put something like alcohol abuse, substance abuse as part of the disorders. 2017, it was the highest, but there are elements to do with some aspect of epilepsy, some aspect of depression, bipolar, which has been common, anxiety, even HIV-related psychosis. I would even say some of these psychotropic drugs, which are drugs given for psychiatric conditions, contribute to some of the issues because of their side effects. Some persons who are taking antidepressants without proper supervision, or even without proper training from the healthcare provider, predisposing them to some of the side effects they have, like social behavior, like even weakness with abnormality in sleeping, abnormality in even suicidal ideation. Some of the antipsychotics have their own issues to be also at the same time. Some even predisposed to diabetes. Some of the mood stabilizers, like lithium, also have their own issues. Anti-anxiety drugs, some of them are also addictive for that matter. So even the psychiatric drugs are not like other drugs in that sense, that they need to be properly regulated. Let's talk about social media. Social media has contributed negatively to mental health, as you have seen during the COVID times, where there were a lot of misinformation, there were a lot of, people were sharing so much kind of information. So as you can see in this research, net negative is Instagram, which you may say is because of the aspect of self-esteem and the image with young girls, for that matter. Something like Snapchat, something like Facebook has its own issues. Twitter, to some extent, perhaps YouTube is the healthiest one due to the fright of information. Simple guidelines from Philippine Council for Mental Health, which was two, especially in the COVID times. The aspect of recognizing the crisis occurs when sudden, at first, circumstances affects the life's person. It's okay not to feel okay. Engage in healthy activities, physical activities, exercise, reducing stress, reading about facts which minimize the fear, because a lot of that fear contributes to anxiety, contributes to even looking for, something like alcohol to ease it, using skills to relieve the stress, shifting perspective in life. This is what you might call cognitive behavioral therapy, and even having a proper community engagement, having proper friendships, family relations contribute to reducing the impact and even the rate of these mental health disorders. Okay. So I can finish up with the aspect of substance abuse, which is target 3.5, including both the coverage of treatment for these substance use disorders and the harmful use of alcohol, specifically when it comes to the aged 15-year-olds and older. Substance dependence means when there's a biological, psychological situation whereby the individual's functionality is dependent on the necessitated consumption of psychoactive substance because of adaptive state that has developed within the individual from taking the drugs themselves. So if they stop taking the drugs, they get withdrawal, which means they get develop some symptoms which are not good for them in a sense, and then that forces them to go and take the drug again. While addiction is more of when there is a dependence, which leads the person to be compulsively keep on looking for a drug, despite the negative impacts it has on their psychology and even their physical body itself. While tolerance is when a person's taking of the drug, let me say alcohol, starts becoming more normal to it. So they need more amount of that dose, for example, of that alcohol. They need to add maybe one more bottle to feel the same impact as before. This was a research done by Makerere University, where you can see alcohol is still number one, but you can see how something like cannabis, it's coming up, marijuana, some aspect of cocaine, some aspect of heroines, and some other conditions, some other substances are available in the market, which are utilized by the youth. And you can see how in this peak, in those COVID times from 2020 till, let me say, the end of 2020, there has been a quite spike because of COVID, because of quarantine, home isolation, the stresses, all those contributes to people to seek something like alcohol for relief. Alcohol at the same time is number one substance which is responsible for a lot of crimes within the society, whether you have to do with homicide, someone getting killed, someone killing themselves, accidents, gender-based violence or domestic violence, theft. I mean, most of the list is continuous. Yes, most of the crimes, one way or another, even child abuse, has been associated with alcohol. The person is on under influence. Yes, this is also shows in South Africa how much domestic abuse has been connected to the alcohol use and maybe some other drugs. Yes, some aspect of unemployment, aspect of poverty. So, some of the things which can be done to help mitigate this issue is cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, about changing the perception. As I've mentioned before, in mental health, these three parts create a feedback loop. So when a person has negative thoughts, leads them to have negative emotions, which leads them to have negative behaviors, negative activities. So a person is having maybe stress, they feel bad, they go and seek alcohol for that matter, or some other drug to relieve their stress. So try and change the perception, how they perceive. Maybe they can manage the bad thoughts so that they don't have to feel bad physically, emotionally, and they have to go and look for a means to relieve it. Or maybe they can find a better ways to relieve it. Maybe they can find a better ways to express their emotions. So these three triads, what is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And lastly, having a communal support due to the concept of AA, which means Alcoholics Anonymous, where people who have the same conditions like alcohol, they meet, they have support, they support each other, they discuss the issues. So they have some aspect of unity, some aspect of accountability, some aspect of having a guardian of each other so that they make sure they're all keeping in touch. Just having that community support helps all of them to really recover from the issues, recover from the bad drinking habits, to share their experience, to have some solitude in the sense, some solidarity, I mean, and some communion together to deal with that issue. Yes.
Yes, thank you, Yako. And I must say that one of the greatest uh, uh, one of the greatest effect to humanity must be mental health, because mental health really it's not like having hypertension, because mental health it impairs your decision making, it impairs your relationships, it impairs even your ability to work. Therefore, this is something which is really very negative towards humanity, because someone would rather be with maybe HIV and is well, is healthy, is functioning, is working, is moving, is making good decisions, and wherever contributing maybe to even the economy of the country. But a mentally disabled person or disturbed person will really not uh, carry any activity, will not contribute to the economy, will not contribute to the decision making, will not even contribute to healthy relationships and even healthy lifestyle. And therefore, if there is something we must fight for, if there is something we must fight actually head on from now onwards, it must be issues related to mental health. And well, thank you for the elaboration, and perhaps we can move on.
Okay, so there are the remaining now four targets, uh, which sort of also compound to having achieving the sustainable developmental goal number 3, reducing road injuries and deaths. So there are human factors which contribute. Yes, there are, let me say, infrastructure factors. There are factors to do with even the machines. But what are the human factors which we are trying to change lifestyle? So in South Africa, as you can see, a pedestrian who is walking on the roads, maybe due to intoxication. So alcohol is important, comes back. The speed, the rate of driving, maybe the person has some aspect of impulsivity, there's some aspect of stress, overtaking a car, rushing, aspect of hit and run, alcohol again, intoxication of the driver, even fatigue, a person who's not sleeping, the lack of proper sleeping contributes to a lot of accidents. I think that's why you hear most of accidents happen at night, to some extent, where the driver has been sleeping or they have not slept maybe for 2 days, especially those who drive these big cars, either the lorries or the coach. Okay, overtaking aspect of even being a bit more of antisocial in a sense, a person ignores the traffic laws themselves, like when they disregard the stop sign, the U-turn. So the human factors play a big role in traffic accidents. Coming back, yes, as I mentioned, alcohol itself is a big player in it, especially when it comes to men who commit a lot of these road traffic accidents, the motor vehicle accidents, in the different age brackets, especially from 25 to 34 and 35 to 44, even up to 54. Alcohol plays a big role in road traffic accidents. This was a logical model about how some of the interventions can reduce the impact, the behavioral change, where by targeting public awareness, by creating some education, contributes to or works together with the enforcement of some of these by the, let me say, the country's governance, and then legislations like banning cell phones all contribute to both the pedestrians not to be walking on the streets anyhow, or not to be drunk for that matter when they are walking the streets. At the same time, drivers to adhere to some of the limits and some of the rules, even seatbelt usage. All these have the potential to reduce road traffic accidents. Yes, so that's why it's a multi-factors. It has requires a teamwork between the individuals and, let me say, the government systems in place to reduce the impact of road traffic accidents. And you say something like COVID actually reduced the impact of road traffic accidents simply because people were locked in their homes.
Thank you. So, yes, you mentioned how these accidents were so low in COVID times because of the lockdown and the restrictive measures which were available by then. But still, that makes us think that it's something which we can avoid. It's something which we can work on, because if it worked, if in COVID-19, I mean, if in the COVID times these accidents were low, how about now? It means whatever we did that time can even be done even alongside even without having these lockdowns. So it's more of taking cautious and caution, and also following the beauty with this whole aspect about roads. At least roads have been well designed to a certain extent. There are some signs and signals and barriers, but now it just comes to the individual aspect. Most it is with the individuals, it's with the people who are actually breaking these signs and these barriers. We are the one who are contributing more to this aspect of accidents. And the funny bit about accidents is one that it's one thing which will hit you and you die within a few minutes or even instantly. So you can be even a healthy young man, a healthy young woman driving or even walking on some of these roads, and a small accident happening maybe in your vicinity or on you can actually lead to your instant death, which is very unfortunate. But also, if you don't die, sometimes you can take long time rehabilitation periods in some of these hospitals. And now we even talked about how perhaps even the orthopedic, it can get to the orthopedic attention and look at the cost, look at the quality, look at the access. You might even fail to have access to some of these. So I think now it's also a behavior change and also cautious mindset and also an individualized attitude or approach of being cautious while you're on the road, whether someone is a pedestrian, whether you're driving, whether you're crossing, whatever the case, we must all have to practice this kind of conscious and also patience to avoid some of the things, because we rather prevent them than having, because even treating an accident victim, I think, is very costly, because it involves a multi-dimensional team. Because you might have gotten a head injury, and now perhaps you might need the surgeon around, you might need someone from anesthesia around, you might need someone. So it is a whole approach. And now these are individuals who perhaps might not really be accessible, and that's how someone's life goes within a few 1, 2, 3 days, and something which you would have avoided. So if it's about taking alcohol, please, there are some good moments of taking the alcohol, but then why should you drive immediately after? Because it really impairs the brains. But well, I think we can continue to our next discussion.
Yes. So this other one, I guess, is interesting because it's to do with sexual reproductive health, which is a complex topic on its own. Mainly, it includes two aspects of percentage of women, married women, these are the indicators, between the age of 15 to 49 who need family planning, and adolescent birth rate from the age of 10 to 14, so childhood pregnancies. What is sexual well-being? Sexual well-being is, according to WHO, is encompassing the ability of an individual to have a responsible, satisfying, and safe sex, and the freedom to decide if, when, and how often to do so. Reproductive health is the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity, which was the definition for health, in all matters relating to the reproductive system and its functions and purposes. So the access to contraceptives among adolescents in Uganda during COVID, as you can see, COVID has played a role, but fun enough, it has spiked. Actually, more people had access during the months from April to August. I will let you to reach your own conclusion why there was a spike of family planning methods in that period time of the lockdowns. Yes, so I think there's a good global support on family planning and education. Another big element in reproductive health is infertility, which unfortunately is increasing. As you can see, this 3-year period research done in Uganda, a survey which shows from the age of 15. So it's comparing the data collected in Uganda from the time of 1988, 1995, 2000, 2006, and 2011, how the majority of, compared to the blue line, which is the 2011, there's been a reduction of fertility in age-specific rate. Of course, especially the older you get, the less infertility. So infertility is becoming more of itself an epidemic, a silent epidemic between, you might contribute to it, to maybe women perhaps getting married later in life, aspect of stress, occupational stress. There's an aspect of, you can say, lifestyle, it's very important. Aspect of nutrition, aspect of obesity, conditions like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is happens with obesity, some cancers here and there, even fibroids, uterine fibroids in women, some gynecological problems, some infections. So infertility is a big factor. Is a big condition which has not really received as much attention as, let me say, family planning. Still, adolescent pregnancies has reduced. However, you can see how much abortion plays a big role in abortion, and we talked about how safe or unsafe abortion is one of the leading causes of maternal mortality. But as you can see, majority of pregnancies in Uganda, especially the adolescents, are not intended; they're accidental, which leads to either ends in abortions, some miscarriage, some they give birth. This was done in 2013. This is to do with aspect of sexual violence in Uganda, especially the rates in the COVID period, where the rates have spiked, which I guess just makes sense because of a lot of people were either at home, they stayed at home, they were locked. So both sexual violence and even access to post uh, exposure prophylaxis for HIV/AIDS have both been spiked, and even teen pregnancies for that matter. There's been some quite spikes, especially in the COVID, but thankfully, the campaigns, the societal education, the school education, because that's where a lot of things happen. Universities, the teenagers have been. There's been, yes, I might say, a successful campaign to reduce the occurrences of sexual violences, which, as I mentioned before, you see all this are interconnected. Alcohol itself plays a big role in sexual violence, especially in parties, in going out to clubs. So all those lead to sexual violence, especially in teenage adolescents, to girls who are exposed to it. These are some concepts by UN Family Planning Awareness, UNFPA concepts. Of course, it's all about sexual education. What are relationships? What are relationships for especially young girls? Aspect of the values, the rights, culture, and you may say sexuality of adolescents. Because yes, they need to be taught about some of these concepts before they come to to just learn about it. Actively. It should be more of passive. They have the knowledge to avoid and to make decisions, consented decisions. I will even say the concept of gender. Yes, if I put it in another way, yes, the girls in a sense need to know that the role they play, they are not just have to be submissive to, considering that the ones who are going to get pregnant, the ones who will deal with pregnancy. So they need to also have an aspect of knowing, yes, gender might be there, but however, doesn't mean that you don't have your own autonomy, decision making, aspect of violence and staying safe, skills for health and well-being, even the human body and development, how it works, sexual behavior and reproductive health. So education will be the one to tap and down some of these conditions of sexual and reproductive health. Can-
Yes, thank you for elaborating about reproductive and sexual and reproductive health. These are issues which require more of empowerment in women, empowering them to have a stand, to have a decision, to have a choice. We have seen we have seen women suffer or suffering on issues related to after the after effects of maybe a sexual relationship. These are women who are left with their children. They are left in their homes. Maybe they are not even having any source of employment. They are becoming the father and the mother. So it calls for more of the empowering women, and also telling them more about their rights, and also perhaps also even skilling most women so that, because the skill comes with an action. If you learn something which is scalable, you can do it even in the worst times when things have really gone bad, in line with your husband, and perhaps, yeah. um I think we can continue with the next
Okay,
conversation.
so the next top target, which is to do with achieving universal health coverage, you can
Mm,
say it's actually the target which all these sort of fall under in a sense, because aspects of financial risk protection, access to quality essential healthcare services, access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable essential medicines and vaccines. So, in a sense, you might say the others sort of fall under everyone's right to access healthcare.
mm, mm,
So when it comes to access, you can see, thankfully, countries like Uganda, maybe compared to even some other African countries, there's an abundance of health centers from the lowest, which is the village health team, to health centers of different categories, to hospitals, to regional referral hospitals, to even national referral hospitals within Uganda.
mm, mm,
However, when it comes to quality, yes, there's an aspect of the healthcare service delivery. But unfortunately, the primary care, specifically the concept we talked about, like nutrition, is not really well taught in medical schools for doctors, for nurses, for healthcare providers, unfortunately. So, healthcare education, when it comes to nutrition and exercise and sleep, is lagging behind. So, majority of the care is more of to do with infectious care, or
mm,
let me say emergencies, but not
mm,
on counseling, guidance, education, on the lifestyle and behavioral modifications, because they're not even in the curriculums of medical schools. And when it comes to even access, there's an element of technology, the use of IT, digital health, using telephones, using maybe even SMS, WhatsApp. For it's still low, but because of technology, I mean internet infiltration, people are using internet more often. So you will really expect it to play a bigger role in healthcare. The same way mobile money played a big role on financial transactions or the financial world. So healthcare, while we really need access to using mobile phones, because almost everyone has an access to mobile phone. Lastly, when it comes to, because I've been talking about the iron triangle of healthcare, I've talked about access, I've talked about quality in a sense. The last
mm,
aspect, which is the cost, we said out-of-pocket payment is really taxing on families and individuals. However, insurance should be taken over. But the reasons why insurance is still low in Uganda, because of number one, it's expensive, and the average family makes less than, actually, they said 99% of Ugandans make less than $300. So you can see how some of the insurance premiums can even go up to 200,000 to currently, even that was 2021, they're almost 400,000. So that's a premium. So that's literally, that could even be a half, almost half of some families' incomes.
mm,
So it's highly expensive. It's highly for the 1% of the rich, or people who are lucky enough to be employed by organizations who are partnered with these big insurance companies. For that matter, even insurance itself does not guarantee quality of care, because you hear in countries like United States where healthcare is private, there's no public healthcare in a sense, insurance leads to more expensive expenditure on healthcare. So what could be cheap in other countries, like which can cost like 2,000 in US, can be up to times three of that, because of the system of insurance.
mm,
But you can see how much of insurance in even countries like US spent on preventive care. I think you can see the green one. It's literally peanuts. It's $300 compared to inpatient and outpatient prescription and even administration. Take more money than preventive or the primary care.
mm,
You may say this, it draws the same picture in even Uganda, which you may even say it was like lack of education and all these things lead to least expenditure on preventive care or primary health care compared to secondary healthcare hospitals and procedures and and medications and even administration. Yes.
Uh, let me pause here some one question. Um, Yako, what is your take on the pharmaceutical industries? Because when you come to inpatient and outpatient care, and when it comes to preventive care, because most of the drugs, or most of the drugs which are being produced are more for the sick care. So if you compare the sick care treatment and the preventive maybe medication outside in the market, the comparison is the preventive is actually negligible in most oftenly. If you happen to go to a hospital, you rarely be prescribed a preventive medication. Most of the medication they will give you there are more of the treatment. So what is your take on that?
Yes, okay, that's a complicated question. To some extent, pharmaceutical or medicines, drugs have really helped to save lives, as we have seen when it comes to infectious diseases, when it comes to HIV, when it comes
Mm,
to even malaria.
mm,
But unfortunately, they, as you said, are more to do with sick care, not healthy care, not preventing you from becoming sick. They are more
mm,
like you first have to be sick, and
mm,
then that's where, well, at the end of the day, they're also businesses, so they have to make money. And
mm,
their businesses are built on the back of sick care. The person has to be sick enough, and they can go and get a medication from the pharmacy. So a doctor, coming back to this point of even education, that's why in medical school, no one teaches you about nutrition. All that you learn is a person is sick, what drugs do you prescribe to them? You write for them the prescription. Sometimes you might be, some doctors might take it on themselves to even give advice on nutrition. But even a condition like diabetes, which is basically a nutritious or lifestyle condition, still treated like a medication, like let me say an infectious. So I prescribe for you this, or
mm,
hypertension for that matter, you become better.
mm,
So all the way from medical schools to the research which I carried out to the public campaigns to marketing, all this contributed to the view of healthcare as more of sick care. That's where you can see that's where the money is in a sense. The
mm,
person has to
mm,
be sick, then now that's where you can charge them money, not
mm,
keeping them healthy in a sense.
mm. How about we also change, we also have this paradigm shift from I can pay whatever amount of dollars you need to prevent me from falling sick, other than paying all this associated money when I'm sick. Because I believe personally, I would really be willing to spend thousands of dollars on keeping myself healthy and keeping myself not sick, other than falling sick to spend. Because there's no guarantee when you have fallen sick that you're going to recover. Because even if, what if it is a terminal, what if the side effects of the drug take you more than even their benefit? That's why, yes, it is a business, I believe, but even investing in preventive care or in preventive medicine as a business would also be a very ideal concept. And also, achieving universal health coverage is dependent on preventive care. Because as much as we still focus on the sick care, because one sick patient takes let's say a minimum of, perhaps one sick person will need a nurse around, will need a physician around, and will need maybe a lab personnel around. Like, it becomes quite very complex to treating or handling this one person, because it the team must be around. Now, how about the preventive aspect? In prevention, perhaps you might not even need the lab. Perhaps you only need the lab for the baseline, that will, what is my glucose levels this month, which is a baseline. And after realizing that maybe it is in the normal range, I don't need to do any other test the following day for. But now, if you're the sick person, they will be like, no, we need to do this monitoring, the routine every day, random blood sugar, fasting blood sugar, which is also very costly. So I believe, as much as, yes, we want to continue with this with the business, of course, but I want to also invite the pharmaceutical industries to invest much in preventive medication. Yes, we have seen vaccines are there, but we also need drugs other than vaccines, so that at least we can focus more on the prevention, which is actually cheaper and actually perhaps even more accessible and affordable and available than the sick care, which is, yes, can be cheaper or even costly, but even the quality is unguaranteed and even the outcome is also unguaranteed. But for the meantime, we can.
Unfortunately, yes, you brought a good point, but unfortunately, I would say pharmaceutical industry in itself is not, it's for producing medicines, and those things when we have talked about are for free. The way you said,
Mm,
exercise is free, no one is going to
mm,
charge you for exercising.
mm, mm,
Dieting or fasting for that matter is free. Proper
mm,
sleeping is free. So, and it's a good point you put in that however much money you have does not
mm,
guarantee that you're going to receive the best service. As you can see with in Africa, a lot
mm,
of politicians who have money,
mm,
who assume just because they have money they can go to US and maybe they can get that care.
mm.
Some don't really even make it.
Definitely.
They are bring by the body. So having a lot of money does not guarantee you are going to be healthy. As we talked about communicable disease for that matter, you
Mm,
rather prevent them from happening,
mm,
which is for free in a sense.
mm,
Majority of it literally doesn't really cost you any money. Maybe you might
mm,
need some guidance, you might need some coaching, but you don't need any medicine, you don't need any surgeries.
mm,
It's all about mentality and lifestyle modification, and
mm,
it's basically free. Literally, there isn't really any money I say it can cost you
mm,
compared to one visit to a hospital for, let us say, unfortunately, you wake up one day with stroke. The way you
mm,
said that alone can cost you a couple of millions, even be
mm,
taken to ICU, as you have seen with COVID for that matter. People who
mm,
are in ICU, some people even passed away, but the hospitals refused to let go of the bodies because they had a lot of debt compounding to tens and 50, maybe 50 million, some even up to 100 million. You hear of such cases, Ugandan shillings. So it doesn't really cost you any money compared to what it takes, what it makes you, what it prevents you from having to go through. So, and yeah, it's a complex concept for that matter, but we shall leave it at that. Yes, preventive healthcare is being underutilized
mm,
by the government, for that matter, by the funders and the donors
mm,
and the healthcare service deliverers, all of them.
mm. Do you think we need more efforts towards that concept of preventive, uh, maybe preventive care? For example, in terms of educating the masses, people need to be educated on the concepts of prevention and preventive care, issues about awareness, because perhaps people they're not aware that preventive is even cheaper, is free, it's doable, and it's action oriented than, and has a guarantee, because its outcome at least has a certain guarantee that at least the outcome, because for example, if I had maybe 65 kilograms today and I task myself to to being physically active within the next 2 months, chances are high that I can even go back to maybe 49 or even 50 something, rather than waking up one time when I'm 80 kilograms, then perhaps I even have high glucose levels, perhaps get some other weird complication. I'm rushed to a certain facility A, and then the outcome is unguaranteed.
Very true, very true. And I will speak for our company, Vigilant Living. Yes, we are trying to do that with our socials. As you said, these things are for free. Anyone who has access to internet should really be able to learn some of this information. At the same time, maybe on top of that, you might need some aspect of coaching, because
Mm,
yes, the behaviors are not easy to change
mm,
individually or personally.
mm,
So you might need assistant, you might need someone who have experience and knowledge,
mm,
and the psychological aspect of counseling. So yes, maybe that's the one element which you might need to, let's say, spend, but that money is nothing compared to the expenses of healthcare, of falling sick
mm,
for this minus condition. Because as you said, diabetes, 8% of people don't even know they have it. So you can even go to a hospital for
mm,
another condition, but by time, let me say, they have discovered that you have diabetes, yes, ideally they will refer you to a doctor. You will start your medications, but even those medications have their own side effects. So all this compounds to put you in a poorer life state, quality of life, compared to
mm.
if you would have prevented, or even today, if even if you have it, you can still recover from it, but through individual, striving and individual efforts to really change your life. How long do you want to live? And even if you live long, how do you want to live? Do you want to be healthy? Do you want to be productive? Or do you want to be bedridden or maybe disabled? As you have seen with a lot of adults, they get fractures of the hips, fractures of the knees, weak knees. So it's just a personal decision. Which kind of future do you see yourself in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years? Do you want to be playing with your kids, your grandkids for that matter? So it's a personal decision at the end of the day.
Yes, thank you, Yako. That has been a nice conversation in line with universal health coverage and also towards attainment of sustainable development goal three, and also vis-a-vis the lifestyle, the behaviors, and the costs. So I think we can move on to the next concept.
Okay. So yes, I think these are the final two presentations, uh, which is target 3.9 to do with
Mm,
reducing now the aspect of the environment when it comes to hazardous chemicals in the air, water, and soil pollution. Everything to do with household pollution to wash, save water, and even unintentional poisoning. I will start with the concept of personal products. So a lot of these personal products we use for cosmetics and skincare, a lot of them have chemical compounds with different consequences, including infertility, obesity, some of these cancers, some of these autoimmune conditions like asthma. So a lot of these chemical products out there, including birth defects for the children, reproductive problems, so they play a big role in personal responsibility that you do not really need to use some of these products out there, considering the cost expenses of a person even bleaching, skin bleaching itself. The other element is when it comes to occupational hazard, where people complain either from physical to chemical to economics. As you can see, this research which was done in Uganda, where you have the workers in the abattoir, the port riders, restaurant workers, they're all exposed to different aspects of occupational hazards.
mm,
And I think one way of trying to manage it better is first aid. Everyone should have first aid training, so that's not for themselves, but even the people who are working, they're working with, or the family members, how to carry them through the ABCD and even the initial danger response and send for help elements. So that could really reduce the disabilities and deaths from occupational hazards and poisoning. When it
mm,
comes to aspects of hygiene, I think the government has taken really good initiatives and some of these NGO donors to really reduce the impact of pollution from, let me say, water, from sewage, from chemicals. Maybe lastly, when it comes to climate change, yeah, that's a bigger concept than us. We cannot really divulge in it manner because it requires a global effort and there are efforts here and there. However, we should just focus on the aspects which are personal, individual, what you do, and even the aspect of occupation. So this is the final concept when we talked about the four means of implementation. The first one, which is to do with strengthening the implementation of the WHO framework for Convention on Tobacco, countries in control in all countries as appropriate. Okay, that is more of on a legal, let me say, governance framework. The next one, which is to do with vaccines and medicine access, which is supporting research and development of vaccines and medicine for communicable and non-communicable diseases that primarily affect developing countries, provide access to affordable essential medicine and vaccines. The third one, which is to do with health workforce, where you have sustainable increase in health financing and recruitment, development, training, retention of the health workforce in developing countries, especially in the least developed countries and small island developing states, which is to do with health, work, density, and distribution. And the last one, which is early warning for global health risk, where you strengthen the capacity of all countries, in particular developing countries, for early warnings, risk reduction management, national and global health risks like COVID-19, and the concept of antimicrobial resistant organisms reducing. So all these means of implementation are not exactly individual; they are more to do with the organizations which are responsible for those stakeholders for implementing some of these. Finally, we will conclude this presentation. Yes.
Yes, I want to first take you back to the previous, yes, the previous conversation about reducing deaths, and you mentioned the key, something key has emerged, and it's about first aid. I believe first aid and first aid trainings should be a must in the current era, because an accident is bound to happen at any time, at any level, and therefore, to me, I believe that every person at every workplace, whether be with whatever kind of work you're doing, a training about in first aid is really mandatory and very necessary, because you don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. Perhaps it could be a fire outbreak, perhaps it could be an exposure to smoke or to chemicals, or it could be just a heart related attack or complication, or it could be a bleeding from your nose, or it could be a cut. And these can really put a threat to your life. And because look at students in Uganda, or even across some of these African countries, how many of the students can really have the skills of first aid? Because these are things which are doable. These are things which don't require a hospital or an ambulance. These are skills which you can learn and do them from the side, so that at least you can stabilize someone's health from condition from state A to state B. But without investing much in some of these trainings and some of these skills, we're going to remain with a small attack or a small accident has happened, and then we wait for an ambulance to come from to be released all the way from Kampala to come to wherever you're staying, either Mukono or Nigeria or wherever, to come and shift you to a hospital with the jam associated with all that. You have no idea. We have no idea. By the time maybe the ambulance is reaching, you're blacking out. How about we interest maybe partners, people who are working in health organizations, NGOs, and even the government, to invest in these first aid related trainings for workers across the board, in maybe in the informal sector, because now the informal sector is bound with a lot of risks, a lot of injuries, a lot of accidents, and also these are people who are not insured. These are people who are maybe unable to access quality care, maybe even on time. But at least there's some small skills and techniques in first aid can at least help you sustain someone's life from at least danger. Yeah, that's what I wanted to pass across.
Yes, that's good.
I
Okay.
think. mm,
So yes, finally, let's come back to this wheel of vigilant living.
mm,
We've touched about some of these concepts all over the place, but
mm,
it's a combination of holistic health and well-being. As we have defined health, which is the state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease. Wellness, which is more to do with individual awareness about the goals of the person and how they want to achieve it. So it's not just about surviving, but thriving as a person. So health brings you to maybe a level of neutral, equal, zero, while wealth takes you from there to live a proper life, a meaningful life. So as vigilant living, we believe there has to be a combination of these 14 dimensions for a person to really live a vigilant life, starting from a spiritual element, concepts to do with meaning and how do people deal with death and freedom and even loneliness. All these concepts are part of the spiritual element. We have the emotional side. We have our different emotions, all the way from anger to happiness to sadness to fear, cognitive side, which is to do with our memories, our attention, our thinking capacity, intellectual, which is to do with our critical thinking, our learning, how we communicate with people. Let's come to relational, which is to do with the relationship we have with our family, friends, spouses, colleagues, occupational, the employment aspect, career progress, promotions, aspects of leadership, financial to do with budgeting, spending, financial debt literacy, recreational, which is what do we do when we want to have some fun, whether we spend socially, digitally, do we take some drugs to really have fun, to nutrition, how much do we take, how often do we eat, which kind of food do we eat, exercise, which is also how much do we exercise, how often do we do it, sleep, same thing, when do you sleep, when do you wake up, what do you do before sleeping, hormones, specifically to do with women, where the normal cycle is she having the normal cycle? Is the pregnancy aspects? If you get pregnant, how is your pregnancy? To even contraception. Is she using contraception? Yes. To an aspect, yes, men have our hormones, which is more of testosterone, but it's not as explicit as the female hormone. Uh, Medical, which is now, are we healthy medically, which is different from the other aspects. Do we have a current illness? How are we handling it? Are we on some sort of drugs right now? And lastly, environmental. How do we talked about the chemicals. Do we use chemicals? We talked about hygiene a lot. We talked about work safety and even security and the bigger planet, which is the climate change, all this. So all these 14 dimensions contribute to a person to live a long or a longer, productive and a meaningful life for everyone. And this is where we come in as vigilant living, because we do offer these services to you as a package, starting from the aspect of counseling, the therapy, the psychological elements, because we talked about all these conditions, all these goals cannot be achieved without a psychological element. Coaching, which is now taking you from the place of we talked about exercise. A person needs to really have a coach to encourage them, to motivate them, to keep them accountable to achieve that goal of healthy living. Consulting with our expertise in all these dimensions of health, living, and even coordination of care. So, in case you are sick, if you just go to the healthcare institutions, you really get lost because it's like a maze. It's complicated. It has its own rules. It has its own. So you need someone to give you that guidance, to coordinate your care, to oversee you if you have no experience. Otherwise, there are always case stories of someone who has been exploited here and there, someone who has had went through so many procedures and treatment and paid millions before they told him maybe you're even okay, nothing was wrong with you. So those four services we offer as a package for individuals and also for organizations in a affordable prices really. So if you want to do that, you can go ahead and book a free 30-minute consultation by going to our website, which is simply vigilantliving.org. You can email us at info@vigilantliving.org. You can WhatsApp us at that number. And then lastly, yes, that's our location in Kampala, Uganda, in Nali Estates. So yes, I think that's it.
All right. Thank you, Yako. This has been a good conversation about SDG free healthcare, lifestyle, and behavior. And personally, I'm getting a conviction that achieving SDG free is it must be associated with lifestyle and behavior modifications because of the benefits, and you have hinted on when it comes about the cost, when it comes about the subjectiveness, because they vary from one person to another. And also, yeah, you have also hinted about the approach of vigilant living being a holistic approach. So I think this means even the care practitioners out there in the medical field, I think treating someone holistically is very key to also maybe achieving or recovering well from an illness. Well, at this juncture, I also want to thank our friends who have been following online, and thank you for sparing your time and being with us here online for this conversation, for this webinar. We believe it has been grateful, insightful, and fruitful, and we thank you all for sparing out the time. And we next time we call for these sessions, please always log in and be with us.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
All right.